All right, so today we're going to dive into something pretty intense.
Yeah.
What if the U.S., transitions from a democracy to a fascist state?
Oh, wow.
And we're looking at this through economic forecasts,
Yes.
political analysis, historical case studies.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
the main point here is we're not fear-mongering.
Right.
We're just exploring possibilities.
Exploring possibilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a heavy topic, but I think looking
Mhm.
at history, it shows us that, these shifts
Yeah.
aren't unheard of. Democracies can become fragile and the consequences can be far-reaching.
So let's start with what this could mean for us at home,
Okay.
the domestic impacts. And,
Yeah.
one of the first things that jumps out from all this research
Uh-huh.
is the potential chilling effect on our basic freedoms, like
Uh-huh.
freedom of speech, the press, even the right to peacefully assemble.
And we're not just talking about, abstract concepts here.
Right.
Think about Argentina's dirty war in the 70s and 80s.
Oh, yeah.
You saw brutal crackdowns on dissent. Journalists were silenced, and anyone who spoke out against the regime risked imprisonment, torture, or even death.
So it's not just like a theoretical loss of freedom. It becomes very real
Right.
and very dangerous for everyday people.
Exactly. And, these crackdowns often go hand in hand with economic shifts.
Okay.
In Argentina, they initially saw some economic growth,
Yeah.
things like deregulation and privatization.
Right.
But it wasn't sustainable.
It's like building a house on a foundation of sand,
Right.
It might look good for a while, but eventually it's going to crumble.
Exactly. In Argentina, it led to hyperinflation.
Oh, wow.
Imagine going to the grocery store and seeing prices double overnight.
Crazy.
That's the kind of economic chaos we're talking about.
And it wasn't just Argentina.
Right.
Chile, under Pinochet, saw a similar pattern.
Yeah.
Initially, some foreign investment came in, but then things took a turn.
Right.
Runaway inflation, people struggling to afford basic necessities,
Yep.
and eventually widespread social unrest.
And what's interesting is that this economic instability often stems from the core tenets of fascist regimes.
Okay.
They tend to prioritize militarization and state control of industries, which can stifle innovation and long-term growth.
So even if there are short-term economic gains,
Right.
the long-term costs can be huge, both socially and economically.
Absolutely. And it's not just about abstract numbers like GDP.
Right.
It's about the potential for real hardship for everyday people. Imagine your mortgage interest rate doubling due to hyperinflation or your job disappearing because the government decided to nationalize your industry.
This is where it gets real for you, the listener.
Right.
What could this mean for your job, your savings, your ability to provide for your family?
Yeah.
It's a chilling thought.
And one that's worth considering because understanding the potential consequences can help us appreciate the fragility of our current system and motivate us to protect it.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about the potential chaos here at home. But what about the global impact the U.S. plays a big role in, on the world stage?
Right.
So a shift like this wouldn't exactly go unnoticed, right?
Right. The ripple effects could be enormous.
Right.
I mean, the U.S. has been a major player in, global stability, for better or for worse.
Right.
A sudden shift towards fascism
Yeah.
could really throw the world into disarray.
It's like dropping a rock into a pond, right?
Yeah.
The ripples just keep spreading outwards.
Yeah. One of the biggest questions is what happens to global alliances?
Okay.
The U.S. has been a key member of organizations like NATO and the UN. A move toward authoritarianism could lead to distrust, fracturing those alliances.
Right.
And potentially emboldening other
Yeah.
authoritarian regimes around the world.
So it's not just about the U.S. becoming more isolated.
Right.
It's about potentially giving a boost to other countries with, less than democratic leanings.
Precisely. And that brings us to another crucial point, the global balance of power.
Okay.
Currently, the U.S. dollar reigns supreme as the world's reserve currency.
Right.
But our sources suggest that this could change dramatically if the U.S. becomes a fascist state.
We're talking about the mighty dollar losing its grip. That sounds like a pretty big deal.
It is a big deal. Imagine a world where the dollar isn't the go-to currency for international trade and investment.
Yeah.
One of the countries that could really capitalize on this is China.
China's been making moves to promote its own currency, the RMB, right?
Right.
Setting up all these alternative systems to kind of rival the dollar.
That's right. They've got the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, or CIPS,
Okay.
which allows for international transactions in yuan. And they've been strategically setting up currency swap agreements with other countries.
Yeah.
They're essentially building this financial fortress.
So if the U.S. takes a step back from the global stage, China's ready and waiting to step in.
And it's already happening to some extent.
Really?
The Financial Times reported a 53% increase in cross-border transactions using the RMB just this year.
So this isn't some far-off hypothetical scenario.
Right.
The shift is already underway. But what does all this mean for the average person?
Well, think about it this way. If the dollar loses its dominance,
Yeah.
it could trigger this domino effect. Central banks and investors might start dumping their dollar holdings, leading to what's called de-dollarization.
Okay.
And that could mean a decrease in the dollar's value, which could lead to inflation right here at home.
So even if we're not, directly impacted by, say, a crackdown on free speech,
Right.
we could still feel the economic consequences.
Yeah.
It's like this invisible hand just reaching into our wallets.
Exactly. The price of imported goods could skyrocket.
Yeah.
Our savings could lose value, and international travel could become much more expensive. It's a ripple effect that could touch every aspect of our lives.
So should we all start stockpiling canned goods and learning Mandarin? I'm half joking.
Yeah.
But it is kind of scary to think about how quickly things could change.
It's definitely a wake-up call,
Yeah.
and it highlights the interconnectedness of the global economy. What happens on the other side of the world can have a very real impact on our lives here at home.
We've talked about the potential impacts at home and globally,
Yeah.
but let's zoom in on the dollar itself.
Yeah.
What happens to the mighty greenback if the U.S. really goes down this path?
Well, as we've touched on, the U.S. dollar currently holds this coveted position as the world's primary reserve currency.
Right.
But, our sources suggest that a shift toward fascism could really jeopardize that status.
So it's not just about the dollar weakening, it's about potentially losing its top spot altogether.
That's right. Central banks around the world hold massive reserves of U.S. dollars. It's seen as the safe haven, a stable asset. But if the U.S. takes a turn towards authoritarianism, that sense of stability could evaporate.
Imagine if other countries start thinking, wait a minute, maybe holding all these dollars isn't such a good idea anymore.
That's exactly what could happen. We could see a massive flight from the dollar as central banks and investors scramble to diversify their holdings, and that, of course, would further accelerate the dollar's decline.
So it's like this vicious cycle. The dollar weakens, people lose confidence, they dump their dollars, and it weakens even further.
Precisely. And this isn't just about these abstract financial concepts.
Right.
A weaker dollar means higher prices for imported goods, which hits consumers right in the pocketbook. It can also make it harder for American businesses to compete in the global market.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty bleak picture here.
Yeah.
But are there any glimmers of hope? Are there any sources that point to countries maybe successfully transitioning away from the dollar as the dominant currency?
That's a great question. While no country has completely dethroned the dollar yet, China's efforts to internationalize the yuan are worth noting.
Yeah.
They've been strategically setting up currency swap agreements, expanding their financial infrastructure, and encouraging the use of the yuan in international transactions. They're playing the long game, and they're making progress.
So it's not just about replacing the dollar with the yuan. It's about creating a whole new system
Right.
that can kind of rival the dollar's dominance.
Exactly. And if the U.S. takes a step back from the global stage, whether due to, internal turmoil or a shift in foreign policy, that could create a vacuum for another currency like the yuan to step in.
This has been a wild ride, folks. We've gone from potential crackdowns on free speech to global currency shakeups.
Yeah.
But before we send everyone into a full-blown panic,
Mm.
I want to emphasize that this is just one potential future. It's not a prediction. It's an exploration of possibilities.
That's right. The goal here is to spark critical thinking, not induce panic. We've looked at some pretty bleak possibilities, but it's important to remember that the future isn't set in stone.
Right.
Our actions, both individual and collective, can shape the course of events.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What can we do with all this information?
I think the key takeaway is this: understand the fragility of the systems we often take for granted, our democratic institutions, our economic stability, our global standing, and recognize that we all have a role to play in safeguarding these systems.
It's about being informed, engaged, and proactive, because ultimately the future is what we make it.
And speaking of being proactive, if you found this deep dive thought-provoking, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We've got plenty more fascinating explorations coming your way.
We'll see you next time for another journey into the what-ifs of our world. Thanks for listening.